And I have the pleasure of inviting the first speaker for the first keynote to the stage, Ivo Rzegotta from the Good Food Institute. Hi, Ivo. In Germany and the DACH region. And yeah, you probably all know the Good Food Institute is dedicated to promote alternative proteins, and I'm sure you have many insights to share. We're happy to listen to your keynote. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. And thank you for having me today. I wish you a good morning. And I'm happy that I can speak here today and to this topic, which is an amazing topic. We have 2.5 kilometers from here, the IFA, which is at the moment here. It is the world's biggest meat industry fair, happening every 3 years. And this time, for the first time, the alternative protein space has a whole hall there with a huge section. My industry colleagues are there at the moment. So we're seeing that this topic really gains attraction. And I want to give you a little talk here about alternative proteins. I must admit that I changed the title this morning. The original title was Alternative Protein and its Impact on Agriculture. And I must say at the very beginning, and I think this is my main takeaway at the end, we don't have evidence to really say what is the actual impact on agriculture. We are in a very early stage of this discussion, and we must be honest about this. So we must deliver evidence, but we are not there. That's why I changed it to protein diversification and its opportunities for agriculture. First of all, for those of you who haven't come across the Good Food Institute, we are a non-profit think tank, international one, working with around 200 people at the moment. And our mission is to make alternative proteins the default, so that it is no alternatives anymore. We are funded by philanthropy, an independent think tank, independent from industry, and we are working in 3 areas. The main area we're working in is basically science. So around 40% of the people working at the Good Food Institute actually hold a PhD or something like this and working on science. Then we have an industry team working with startups on the one hand, but even more so working with established industries, with retails, but more so with producers of B2B producers, etc., who are not yet in the space, but where we want to tell them about opportunities. And then finally, we'll also have a policy team. I'm part of the policy team, as I said, leading our policy work in Germany and the DACH region. We are working in 7 areas of the world at the moment. So we added Japan to the card a couple of weeks ago, because we really must see this whole thing started in the US more than 10 years ago. In Europe, we have been working since 2019. And at the moment, we see the most attention of policymakers and of the industry in Asia. So we concentrate a lot on Asia at the moment, Japan, South Korea, etc., also China. In Europe, we are around 40 people working at the GFI. In Germany, it's basically me and a colleague working on policy, and we also have a science colleague here. So what are we doing? Usually when I give a talk, I talk a lot about what are the challenges of the food system, talk about public health, talk about climate, talk about biodiversity. I'm pretty sure that I don't have to do this in this room. I think most people are very aware where we are and will want to talk about solutions and not so much about problems. Just so I picked up this one slide where I wanted to say governments made commitments on EU level and also on national level, especially when it comes to climate action, climate protection. We all know that agriculture is a major contributor at the moment. There are different figures on it. Sometimes it's 14, sometimes it's 20% worldwide. In Germany, it's less. But we have to find ways. And we all know that things that we tried for decades didn't work. We tried for decades telling people what to eat, not with a lot of ambition, but people did, NGOs did, and it simply didn't work. So our solution at the Good Food Institute is really promoting advancing alternative proteins as a technical way to deal with this challenge, like we did with energy, like we did with transportation, to really say, let the people eat what they want, but let's produce these foods in more sustainable ways. This is basically our approach. And when talking about alternative proteins, to give this bit of context is, you see here a variety of protein alternatives to meat and dairy products. And for a very long time, the whole debate concentrated on the left side here. And also, even now, some political discussions are focusing on, hey, why don't we ask the people to eat more lentils, etc., to prepare, to cook by themselves, etc. The problem is, we all have the experience that this does work with a small group of people, but that this does not work with the majority. So we focus on the right side, which are technological, more advanced technologies, and some of them even things we count as deep tech. So it's basically plant-based foods, things you can also you can buy today in the supermarket, early forms of it. Fermentation-made foods from biomass fermentation, precision fermentation, or even traditional fermentation, and cultivated meat. And I will come back to this later. What we see is that those alternative proteins that we really see that they are a mighty problem-solving tool, that we can tackle a lot of these things. We were talking about climate protection, biodiversity on the one hand. We have this whole topic of public health, preventing the next big epidemic, and also the risk of antimicrobial resistance, which comes even more important at the moment. We didn't talk so much about the contribution of alternative proteins on food security and economic benefits in the last 10 years, but I think this is something that really changed over the last 2 years, and what will also change in the future, and which is also relevant in, I would say, shifting political priorities all over Europe and the world. And finally, I think animal welfare is pretty self-explanatory. So they address major social challenges, but what we also see is that this discussion for a very long time did not really involve farmers for a very long time. So I would even say those were completely different words with completely different events, a completely different language. So farmers had their conversations, and then there was a fancy startup world where we have completely other conversations between investors, startups, etc. And this is something I would say where we are at the beginning of changing this. And all people are aware that this has to change. The startups themselves, I would say non-profits working in the space are aware of the politics. And also my feeling is that farmers associations also are opening up to this conversation, that we really see there was very little communication, and also protein diversification was very long thought as a net zero game. So if alternative proteins gain market share, other people will lose it and people will lose jobs. This was something that even was in advertisements or in the way of communication that startups did, etc. We saw that this really changed. This has consequences. What we saw over the last 5 years in Europe, not so much in Germany. I would say Germany is on the safer side of this debate. But if you have a look at Austria, at Italy, France, Hungary, we see that this whole topic of protein diversification, alternative proteins, became massively politicized. And one of the main reasons behind it were that farmers really thought that they would be or could be the losers of this game, and brought this into politics. And especially in countries where politics, farmers' associations are very close. Italy, with Cordiretti as the farmers' union, we saw that this has serious consequences that, for example, led to Italy at least trying to ban cultivated meat, Hungary following this way, Austria writing this in their coalition agreement. So it is really important that we have this conversation with farmers. I now want to come to a part where I at least give us an idea. I don't can present very much data because there are not really data on this. How could this look like involving farmers in the discussion and make them a part of the value chain in alternative protein production? First, very generally, what are the ways or some ways farmers can profit from protein diversification? Of course, I think when coming to plant-based, it's very easy. We see new crop markets developing here. So I will go a bit more in detail now because I will talk to every of the three pillars I introduced earlier. They can diversify their income and mitigate risks that they just have if you are just relying on growing a couple of crops. If you integrate new crops, legumes or so in your crop rotation. We have this whole topic that also a discussion that just started utilizing side streams, which is also something that farmers would benefit from, and also which is for environmental reasons very good. And land use efficiency. We know that we have this political aim of more organic farming, etc. We have limiting factors here, which is basically land. And we all know that producing alternative proteins requires much less land than the food system we have today. And so alternative protein diversification could really be an enabler for bringing up the share of organic farming. There was a study from Green Alliance from last year that said we could bring organic farming up to 30% in Germany if we would significantly raise the share of organic farming in Germany. I now want to go through the three pillars. I think with plant-based, it's pretty obvious. It's plant-based foods, and farmers can grow the ingredients for this. And there we are at a very early point. So basically, the plant-based meat and plant-based food we know today is basically from soy, wheat, and peas, with peas becoming more important in Europe. On the right side, you see non-exhaustive lists of that. We have much more possibilities here for the future, more options that plants give us, and all of these things are not really explored. So, and also things like soy and peas are not yet optimized for making plant-based meat out of it. So there are a lot of opportunities that we for farmers to just deliver what we need to make a plant-based meat and plant-based dairy. There was a study, I think 2 years ago, that said if we want to come to 6% market share worldwide, we would have to build 800 facilities, and we would have to grow the legumes that we grow today by the factor 10. So there is a lot of potential, but of course this needs to be broken down to countries like Germany, or so you cannot grow certain crops here. This is really a task that we have to do. Other advantages for farmers is if they integrate legumes into the crop rotation, it gives you healthier soils, greater resilience, etc. So while it is very obvious with the plant-based section, when talking about the more sophisticated technological platforms, fermentation, cultivated meat, we are at a very early stage of the discussion. And I think we must be as a sector or people working on the sector very honest, and we should be very cautious of not be over-promising. The sector did this before, and this was not good. So everything here should be seen with a question mark, and there's a lot of could on this and the next slide. So we see that startups are working on fermentation technologies, biomass fermentation, precision fermentation technology. I won't go into details here of the technical platform. But for doing this, you need inputs. And in fermentation, it seems to be pretty sure that those inputs can be, the majority of those inputs will come from agriculture. On the one hand, by just growing things like sugar. On the other hand, by utilizing side streams. This utilizing side streams at the moment is, in most cases, just a headline. So it needs a lot more of research to really see what is a suitable side stream that can be used for certain ways of fermentation. As GFI, we're currently conducting a study in North America on which then gets very, very granular. But North America is not Europe and it's not Germany. So this is really something you have to spell out in Germany as well. There is one study I want to point to that was done for Lower Saxony by Klima, a think tank. They really had a closer look with precision fermentation in mind. How can, in Lower Saxony, really farmers provide inputs for this technology, and came to a positive result. But the main point here is really there are research gaps. One thing is that I find very, very interesting is that we see startups and also the DIL in Quakenbrück working on the question, and can we use fermentation to make edible things out of grass? This is also a thing that is at the very beginning, but which is, I think, interesting thought. Cultivated meat. With cultivated meat, it becomes even more uncertain. What is the role of farmers? What we know is that one thing that can go into the growth media for cultivated meat could be plant-based ingredients. And a lot of companies working on this. Blue Seafood published about this, or it did not publish, but said that they are working with products from farms, from farmers. Where it gets more uncertain is about other things like, do we really need, in the end, cells that come from a farm? Because at the moment, the industry is really thinking about, do we in the end have immortalized cell lines that really only need very, very few animals, so that you cannot build an industry on this? And then we have sometimes discussions where people bring in the idea of, why don't we do this on the farm, and a farmer can then have an additional way of earning money. I would be cautious. There are feasibility studies on this, and it's good that we have those studies, but let's really wait and do avoid over-promising here. I would, at the moment, not say that this is a way that the technology is likely to scale, but we should be open and wait what those feasibility study bring. As I said, we have very little evidence. I want to very briefly touch on a study we published in February. This was not about agriculture, but this was one little component of it. I will really rush through the study, but I invite you to have a look at the whole thing. So for Germany, we saw in 3 different scenarios, based on expert interviews, on a modeling, and also on scanning of the literature. We saw what could be scenarios for the development of alternative proteins involving all 3 platforms. And we had a business as usual, a medium and a high ambition scenario there. The difference between those 3 scenarios was basically the level of policy support. And we said, to this very ambitious scenario on the right side, to come there, we really would see significant political support, like we saw with renewable energy, etc. But the potential that's systemic here said we could see in Germany alone is 23 billion euros across the value chain, including producing fermenters, extruders, etc., not only the end products. The yellow part of the bar here is plant-based, and the blue one is those more sophisticated pillars, fermentation derived and cultivated, and all forms of hybrids and blends. So this is what they came up with as 3 possible scenarios. And then they said, what would this actually mean in terms of economic benefits? And for GVA contribution, they said, in our high ambition scenario, this could be up to 65 billion euros that we could see here as additional GVA in Germany alone. Again, across the whole value chain. So, and this is mainly driven, not so much driven by that people buy plant-based stuff for 65 billion euros here. That's not the point here. This is about building machines and exporting them in the world. And they also came up with numbers for total jobs creation and said that in this high ambition scenario, in the long term, we're talking about 2045, the sector across the whole value chain could create up to 250,000 jobs. This sounds like it is a lot, but again, the whole value chain with a lot of machine building industry jobs here. If you break this down, and this is a part of the study where we're really talking about the role of agriculture, we saw that in this high ambition scenario, alternative proteins could create up to 40,000 jobs in farming, where they produce inputs for all 3 pillars. But you see that there are other parts that would even profit more, and this is really industrial jobs, producing equipments like extruders, etc. But it's 40,000 jobs, and this is the long term. If you have a look at 2030, then it would be even 15,000. So there is a potential, and this is something we want to tackle. This study at the moment is being replicated and with a deep dive on fermentation for whole Europe. We also have, having this in mind, that we have to deal more with this topic. We now started as GFI to really have conversations with farmers. We just started with this, but we're having conversations with farmers that are in the space, and even more so with farmers that are not in the space yet, but are kind of interested. But we're asking them, what are the barriers? What are the points for you that are really bring you to a point where you say, I'm not there yet? I won't go through all of these points, but I brought you a non-exhaustive list of things where farmers say at the moment, those are things that are really barriers. And the main points at the moment is really demand is unclear. It is unclear how they can do this in a way where they can actually have money with this. But also there are knowledge gaps about the crops themselves. There is limited experience with this. Another point that a couple of people just mentioned is that most of the soy isolates, etc., actually come from China from a price where you cannot compete, and that it is not feasible at the moment to build regional value chains here. A P value chain also in Germany. So a couple of challenges. And so when I come to my last little chapter, when talking about the opportunities for farmers, we also have to talk about the role of policy makers. This transition we are talking about is not a transition or diversification that we can leave up to startups or companies. Policymakers have a huge role in this. I want to, in a very general sense, give you a feeling of what am I talking about. So, as I mentioned a couple of times, all these 3 pillars are in a very, very early stage of development, even plant-based. And at the moment, demand is very shaky, and we see a plateau in a couple of markets, or even decline in the US, in the UK, in Netherlands. In Germany, we see steady growth, but not so much than a lot of us expected. And this is because the products are not there yet. We need to have further improvements in taste, in texture, in the nutrient profile. And we see a big role also in government in investing in this, like they did with renewable energy, like they did with electric vehicles. This is really something that helps to secure the demand in the long time. Establishing regional value chains. At the moment, while the animal value chain has been established over decades, this is something we have to do in the space for plant-based. This is not there, and for the other platforms, it is even more in the future. At the moment, it is really, we have a situation where farmers don't speak to the manufacturers, etc. Building this up, we really need support from governments doing so. And finally, we need direct incentives for farmers to diversify their business. So education, funding schemes, long-term purchase agreements, public procurement can help by this. 16 million meals a day that go to schools, hospitals, etc. This is a general thing. Now, Germany. We know we are this week and in these months in a time of transition from the old government to a new government that's now finally here. But to take a look back to the last years, we must say the German government really did a lot of things in the last 2 years or so. When I was talking about this topic 3 years ago for the first time, I really was kind of complaining, hey, look what the Netherlands do and what the UK does also. This really changed. We saw a lot of action. It was integrated in the old coalition agreement of the former coalition. And finally, in 2024, there were a lot of things happening. So at the moment, a protein strategy in the ministry is being developed. On the one hand, there was a funding scheme to support farmers in the transition. And so far, at least from what is publicly available, 4.5 million have been invested in this Chancen program Höfe. And also there were other funding schemes for startup innovation at the beginning of this legislature. And I don't want to forget that since autumn last year, we have this Competence Center Proteins of the Future at the BLE, which does a very good job in tackling those things like building up value chains, bringing together stakeholders, identifying the stakeholders. So there are things that actually happened. The question is, of course, what about the next 4 years? If you have a look at the coalition agreement, I would say this is basically the same level of support that on paper that you can see compared to the last coalition agreement. I will not speak to the way how the new minister was announced, but I'm still optimistic that the new government will tackle a couple of things that needs to be done now. And from our point of view, as a Good Food Institute, but I think that I'm speaking for large parts of the sector, is what we really would see is that this protein strategy that is being developed at the moment is being seen as a holistic strategy that really picks out all those topics that are relevant for this point, using side streams, which crops can we actually grow, where are we with R&D funding, where are we with just regulatory approval, whether it's really, I cannot speak to this here in detail tomorrow, but today, but I know that for most startups here that are in the novel food space, this is the main topic. And all these points should be addressed in a holistic protein strategy. And it would even better to loop in the other ministries here and not make it just a BMELH strategy, but also to include the new technology ministry, and other ministries who are in charge of parts of this equation. Also, I just mentioned it, we must ensure a solid and efficient path to market for companies working on precision fermentation, cultivated ingredients, biomass fermentation. At the moment in Europe, if you want to bring through a novel food product, it takes you 5 years and costs €1 million. This is not something where we can be at the forefront of innovation in the world. And it is very important, of course, public funding, to raise public funding. So in the last legislature, the German government invested €111 million, but this should be something that we should continue. And we should not only spend this money on just transition, but we are really at the stage where we need to improve the products. And so R&D funding, helping companies to scale with infrastructure, those are the next steps in this transition. Yeah, and I already said, of course, we need to work on those building value chains, helping farmers in the transition, etc. One last point is, if you ask German people, do they want this support? Around half of them, 53%, say yes, the German government should support in the transition. Only a third of them is more critical, and we see that this support is, of course, it's a bit different also, but that even with CDU/CSU, half of the people supports that policymakers should support farmers in the transition. That's basically it. So what did I want to give you on the way? The first thing is this whole discussion is just starting to begin. Protein diversification has many opportunities for farmers, and we should flesh this out in the next years. The role of farmers has long been neglected, and there has been little communications between the various players, and each of us should work on this that we overcome this. There are still many open questions. This is, I think, the main takeaway, and a lot of challenges regarding the involvement of farmers that we just need to tackle. And this research is also, a lot of it I see in the public sphere. This is something that the industry cannot do alone. And the final point, policymakers have a responsibility to do so. That's it. Thank you. Yeah.
That's interesting. And thank you for opening up the topic. And I will come around this staircase the next time again. It was a little bit okay. We want the opportunity to ask that you in the audience ask some questions now. I think we have a microphone here somewhere. So if you have a question, here's a hand. See it?
Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. I would have two questions. The first is to make clear that policy making is very important to drive this forward in Germany. You mentioned also that is in the coalition agreement, but it says it is to reduce the imports. And this is none of the reasons you mentioned are the 5 more important reasons to drive this. Perhaps you can elaborate a bit on this, whether it's only this or is it an extract from it, I don't know. And the second is that you said in China, the production of soybeans and so is much, much cheaper than here. So it would be questionable whether that's competitive here. What are the reasons why China is also advanced or more competitive in this regard? Are these subsidies or policies, or is it just lower labor costs or better climatic reasons, or whatever is the reason why China is ahead in this area? Thank you.
So I cannot really grow into a lot of details what this soy thing from China really means. What is definitely true is that it isn't that easy to grow soybeans in Europe like it is in other countries, China or such. It's not only China. So, but there are other reasons as well. If you take, for example, a soy mill, we don't have a soy mill in Germany. We don't have the infrastructure. So if you want to produce soy isolate or so, you just have to export the soybeans to a soy mill. I think we have 2 in Europe or so, and then bring it all back to Germany. This makes it very expensive, and things like this in the end drives the price. The other question was, give me
regarding the coalition. What is really your
it's a coalition
stick thoughts about what will happen the next?
I wasn't in the negotiations, so I don't know how they came up in this final sentence in the yes, and they emphasized on producing or reducing the dependence on imports. This is what we see all over Europe. But in the end, if you see at the very last part of what you find in the coalition agreement, there are 2 words that are important. The one thing is market access, which is just improving the way how we authorize those products. And the other one is something where you can say, okay, this could be a way of supporting it. If the main motivation behind it is reducing the dependence on imports, I'm fine with this.
Okay, thank you, Ivo. Use your chance. What do you want to know from Ivo? Is there another question I can hand on? No? Yes.
You mentioned that the typical issue is the profitability for the farmers. Then you should also have thoughts about what is a fair distribution of the value created by startups and that they get a fair share of it, because I think there is a clue that never is being touched on.
So this is definitely one of the challenges. I think one of the real challenges is make it a fair transition, a just transition, and to do so, we really have to find mechanisms that farmers can actually profit from this. At the moment, a lot of them come to the conclusion that it isn't a viable business model for them. And in the end, so we now have to have this discussion. If in the end the solution is subsidies or something like this, I don't know whether it's the solution, but we have to have this discussion. So we have last year we had this amazing announcement of Nordzucker that they want to build this facility because for a couple of reasons. The demand is not stable, or at least the demand doesn't show the trajectory that we all hope for. And just the calculation for the single farmer, where they said if we include legumes in crop rotation, in the end, this didn't prove to be a viable model. And so they postponed this decision, which is not good for the sector. But which shows that we really have to see, that we really have to have this discussion. How do we come to a point, and with which instruments, tools, do we come to a point that it gets a viable model for the farmers too? And my point is we have to have the discussion of what's the role of policy in it.
But the good thing is we will have a panel discussion on this subject later on. So all these questions will be discussed in a few minutes. Thank you, Ivo. I think you're released from the stage. Very cool.